and welcome to the second of KFPL's Summer Art Studios. My name is Sarah, and today we're going to take our inspiration from the illustrator Ted Harrison. Ted was born in a small village called Wingate, County Durham, England, in 1926. It was a coal mining town, and based on the only painting of his that remains of Wingate, we see that at least through his eyes, it was a pretty grey and dour place. He became an art teacher, traveled the world, mainly places like Malaysia and Africa, and then in 1967 moved to northern Alberta and then the Yukon. And it's there that he developed the style of painting he became famous for. Picture a snowy landscape at sunset. The snow doesn't stay white. It takes on all the colors in that sunset. The pinks and oranges, the reds and purples and blues. It becomes a magical place. And he used the jewel tones. Think of amethysts and rubies and sapphires. And it's there, in that palette of colors, that we're going to take our inspiration today. In this beautiful book, A Brush Full of Color, The World of Ted Harrison, the authors Margriet, Ruers, and Katherine Gibson quote Ted as saying, "We should all try to spread a little happiness wherever we are." Pretty nice advice to try and follow, I think. Early in his career, people referred to his art as folk art, or even said he was crazy. And he would respond that he called it the School of Cheery. When Ted found himself in the Yukon, an environment of deep cold and long nights, he chose to focus on the beauty. Through his eyes, we see the energy, vitality, and magic of this new world around him. I'm going to get us started by sharing some images in these books to give us an idea of exactly what his style of art is like. I'm thinking you may have encountered it before. Perhaps at school you would have heard the story poem, The Cremation of Sam McGee, written by Robert Service, but illustrated by Ted Harrison. In it, there's a classic sunset image. The moon is in the sky and the sun is going down. And you can tell that there is both water in the background, illuminated an orangey yellow by the sun, but the snowbanks are in shadow, and so they are bluey and purpley. In this other sunset picture, we see another aspect that became really prevalent in his work, and that is the use of heavy outlinings to separate aspects of his painting. He's not using acrylics or pastel to have soft edges, but rather makes those bold separations in clouds, in the landscape, and to separate one thing from another. Here we get more of that use of bold lines to separate segments of his picture, both in the sky and in the water. I think he has a sense of humor as well. Although we've all seen that phenomenon of snow made blue or mauve by shadow and a setting sun, I don't know too many people who have seen a pink moose, or a pink walrus, or in a northern community on a snowy night, a pig and a turtle and a duck and a green cat waiting to see the vet. The other thing Ted does is he keeps things simple. The shapes are bold and reminiscent of what we're seeing, but he doesn't get bogged down in small details. He just gives us an impression. see more samples of his work, why not go to the Ted Harrison website? We'll also list all of the details of these titles at the end of the program. Ted tended to work in acrylic paints, but it doesn't really matter what you use. You could use any of a number of different things, but the main thing is to try to keep it to that palette of jewel tones. Think of that sunset that inspired him so much, and the colors you would see there reflected in the snow. So it doesn't matter if you would use acrylic paints the way he has, or whether you want to try using regular crayons or markers or oil pastels. That's what I thought I would use today. Then, of course, the other thing you need is the paper that you'll work on. And same thing. Maybe you've got printer paper or watercolor paper, or in this case, I've got a bit of cardstock to use. The first thing to do is to give a little thought to how you want to orient your paper. Remember, you can always do it in the horizontal or the vertical orientation, or maybe you prefer to work in a smaller space. So by cutting your paper, to whatever size you'd like, or to make it square, you can always do that, of course. So I've marked my page in half, and I'm going to cut it and work with a much smaller space so that when I'm finished, what I'm going to have is a greeting card. But of course, same thing, it can be oriented either way. As you embark, you may want to sort of do a light sketch to give you a sense of the composition or where you're heading with your art, or just plunge in. Get going with the pastels or paint or crayon directly. One of the advantages of doing a little sketch first is you can be thinking of the colors you're going to use as you draw it, imagining the composition in those terms as well. Ted is an incredible colorist, bold and not tentative in any way, shape, or form. You'll also find that he almost never leaves any white space in his paintings or drawings. And as we talked about earlier, he's using those jewel tones a lot. So I'm going to start by getting rid of things like a pale pink and a tan or a gray. These are not colors that he would use. And so I'm going to do myself a favor and put some of those away. The other thing is he applies color really strongly. He's not doing what we think of as that term, the pastel shading, where it's applied lightly and you continue to see the white through it. Instead, his colors are applied very solidly, and the end result, we're not going to see the white paper through it. One thing that can be really useful is to set yourself up a little color reference sheet. This is particularly great for when you've got several shades in the same color palette and maybe items from more than one set or more than one company, and they don't always cover or look the way they appear. The other thing is to have a separate sheet where you can experiment a little bit first with how your color combinations are going to look before you actually apply them to your page. helpful while I was working on my image. One was to have a Kleenex to wipe my hands if they became too sticky or oily for my taste. And the other, partway through, I got up and found some toothpicks because I was finding, because I'm pressing hard to cover the page solidly, you get some of the little balls of excess oil pastel. And I could just use the tip of the toothpick to remove it from the page and clean off the end on the Kleenex. Also, at one point, one of my pastels broke and made a mark on a spot I didn't want. And I found, again, by using the toothpick, I could remove some of the color that had been marked there and then just go over it with the color I did want. To work with crayons, I'm going to start the same way, creating a color reference sheet for me to go by. You can see with the reds especially that some of them are almost identical when you color them on the page, even though they all had different names and slightly different wrappers. So, I'll get started. Of course, another medium to use is paint, like Ted Harrison did, but I don't have very many in the house. I'm going to actually just do a little mixed media here, give myself an orange sun made of pastel, and then see what I can come up with using the few paints that I do have. I can tell you one thing, the paint spreads so quickly and easily that the time required from start to finish is a lot less than using either the crayons or the oil pastels so far. We'll compare it with markers as well. But there is a real joy in the ease with which you can apply the color. Something I hadn't expected. So the final medium today is marker. Just like the others, a reference chart to give you an idea of exactly how the colors appear on the page. I'm going to experiment with just drawing freehand. My thought is if you draw it with pencil, the markers are so transparent that even when you've finished coloring it, the pencil's going to show through. And that's fine, but I just thought I would experiment with drawing freehand. In each case, I've taken portions of images that inspire. And so you might like the sun in one, the mountains in another. You might want to experiment with doing a person or an animal. And so we're not necessarily taking a specific image of his and trying to carry it all the way through, but rather taking the portions that inspire you or speak to you and composing your own image. At home, because you may not have books of his to look through, his website, tedharrison.ca, will give you a whole range of things to look through and give you guidance. One thing I'm finding with the markers is there isn't as broad a range of shades of color. So that can prove a little difficult. But that's one of the things that's sort of fun, is you're going to have different advantages and different effects depending on the medium you're using. And I encourage you to have fun just seeing how they can be different, or do mixed media. You know, maybe you use, the pastel orange for your sun and markers for the whale, but then the finishing touch is going to be with a dab of paint. So, depending on what you have at home, you can work in crayon, or pastel, or paint, or marker to take inspiration from the work of Ted Harrison. We'd love to see your art, so we're going to have a photo gallery that we'll post a week after the end of this series. We encourage you to take some pictures along the way of your art and art making and send them to my email address, which will appear at the end of this program. Thank you so much for joining me for this second of 4 summer art studios. I hope to see you again. Next week, we'll be doing some collage work inspired by the British artist Johnny Lambert. See you then.